How's it going, trader? And welcome back to my YouTube channel. So, as you know, on a Monday morning, we like to do the weekly outlook, where I'll give you an outlook of how I view the markets going into this week and perhaps how it would be playing out going forward. So, before I get into it, I hope everybody had a blessed weekend. Uh, Remember, I am not licensed to provide financial investment or trading advice. Everything I speak about on these videos is purely my own opinion. You can use it for educational purposes. I do not recommend any specific trade or action. If you do choose to go into live fund trading, ensure that you do it with cash that you are willing to lose, because God's honest truth is you could lose your entire investment. Now, let's get straight into the outlook of the charts this morning, and I hope to make this session a bit quicker so that we can get through everything in as much detail as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with, let me just ensure I'm sharing the correct screen. So we're going to start with, obviously, as the format of this video goes, every week we're going to start with the dollar index, work our way into the two currency pairs that I do trade, and then we'll move over to the synthetic indices market. Overall, last week we spoke about a lot of downside on the dollar. And as you can see, that has actually played out quite well last week. So if you were able to capitalize on the bearish dollar last week, which means that for dollar code pairs, you would have been looking for buys. For dollar base pairs, you would have been looking for sells. With the exception of a few, it didn't necessarily play out, but for the major part, it did actually play out very well. So looking at the market for this week, we are looking at continued downside on the dollar, right? So as you can see on here, what I've got, this is the daily chart. We can see price made a higher high, higher low, a higher high, right? So currently it is in an area where it could be making a higher low and then give you some sort of a pattern, such as that, maybe a reversal pattern or whatever it is that people trade, something like that, right? So people will most likely be looking for another test to the upside and then look at it going back to the downside thereafter. Overall, looking for, from my perspective right now, as you can see, I've got this little black block in here, right? Because I'm identifying that as a market structure break to the downside, because there would have been a swing low formed in here on the lower time frame, whether it's on the 1 hour chart or on the 4 hour chart. So overall, right now, the way I see it, there is a market structure break to the downside. So I am now bearish. You can see price has hit my pivot level that I generally look for, which is that yellow line, and it has reacted very strongly off that. What I would be expecting is something like maybe a retest up into somewhere around these areas in here before I expect the market to come back down to this area or even back down into this zone. But overall, I am looking for continued downside on the dollar. Looking at the 4 hour chart, because I have some of my analysis on the 4 hour chart. You can see on the 4 hour chart as well, I've identified. So this would be that swing low that I spoke about on the daily, where I've marked that little block on, right? And as you can see in here, you can see very clearly that there was a swing low formed. Whether you want to take that one or this one, you can see either which way this pushed to the downside, broke market structure to the downside. So overall, currently, we are in a bearish market at the moment. However, it's impossible to ignore the fact that we're forming a higher low on the daily chart, which means that we will see some sort of a bullish push earlier in this week before we see a later in the week, the market turning around and going to the downside. Overall, you can see I've marked up my pivot point in here, which is this yellow line, where the market has broken to the downside and it's rejected off here, created a high, which is still a lower high, and now it's created a higher low in here, right? So overall, what I would be expecting after seeing this higher low, I'll be expecting to see the market trade back to the upside. Overall, coming back maybe to make a higher high in and around that area in here, a higher high, maybe something like that, and then I'll be looking for some sort of a reaction off around here and the market to go to the downside from there. So overall, what I'm thinking for the first day or two of this week, we should see a lot of upward pressure on the dollar, just looking at the dollar index, and we'll be looking for the dollar coming back into somewhere around, say around this broken structure in here. Around this broken structure in here is where I'd be looking for something like that. and look for this to go back to the downside. It can obviously go slightly higher as well, but overall, we're looking for that downside momentum on this chart. Let's move over to the AUDUSD. As you know, my main pairs are AUDUSD, EURUSD, and then I look at the dollar index for confluence. My strongest pair, however, is EURUSD, because I like the correlation between EURUSD and the dollar index, where I spoke about why that correlation is so strong. And you can go back and check out last week's video or the week before. I'm not really sure which week I did speak about it. Looking at AUDUSD right now, you can see very clearly on AUDUSD, we formed that high, we formed that lower low, lower high, lower low. So we've broken market structure there and broken market structure again to the downside. We've come up and done a false break above this previous high in here. But as I always say, I do not consider this a break of market structure, because for this to have been a break of market structure, I would have to see a candle close above this level, and then I would consider this a break of market structure. But overall, the momentum on this market is still to the downside. We can see a strong consolidation in this area here, where we're basically building up some sort of a sentiment in this market. So people will be looking for buys because this is apparently a strong level of support, or people will be looking for sells because this is a strong level of resistance. But I'm not necessarily interested in that. What I do notice in this market in here is that we did reject very strongly from here, but we didn't make a higher high. We came back and rejected again, and we've made another attempt to the upside. So what I would be looking at on here is I would be looking at perhaps a small pop down into here, and then a pullback up into this level in here, which in keeps as well with the dollar, because we're looking for something like that, and then to the downside on the dollar index. So if the dollar index goes early in the week goes bullish, and then later in the week goes bearish, then in here we'll expect it to go bearish earlier in the week, and then bullish for the later part of the week in here. So overall on here, I'm just looking for a pop into there, and then perhaps I'll be looking to take this market much lower. I haven't really highlighted my downside targets on here, but we could always come back to the monthly chart and have a look at the monthly chart. For me, I would expect this market to at least come back into around this area in here before it makes a decision whether it wants to bounce and go lower, or whether it wants to bounce and go higher in that instance. But overall, long term on this market, I am bearish. Long term on the dollar index, I am bullish, right? So in this area, let's have a look at the 4-hour chart as well. On the 4-hour chart in here, we can see very clearly that the market rejected very strongly off here and didn't necessarily give us a break of market structure on that first attempt. Pullback, made a higher low, and then broke market structure, made a higher high, made another higher low, and another higher high in there. So that's showing us some sort of a upward momentum in this market, also supporting that pullback that I'm expecting back up into there and back to the downside. I've marked this level here. As you can see, price did do a false breakout below this level in here. So I'll be expecting to see this form a strong level of support, if you want to call it that, and I'll be looking for this market to go back up into around that area before I start looking for sells on this market. Overall, early in this week, I will be looking for buys on AUDUSD, and then later in the week, I'll be looking for sells. Now, even if the market does come back down into this area in here, I'll still be looking for buys until the market does break and close below this level. I will not be looking for sells. But overall, currently, I'm still very bullish on this because it's also supported by what we see on the dollar index as well. Looking at the EURUSD as well, you can see that we had some strong reaction of my pivot level on the monthly chart. So we currently are in a short-term bearish market on the EURUSD, similar to what we see on the dollar index and similar to what we see on the AUDUSD in terms of the correlation. Now, looking at here on the daily chart on EURUSD, we can see price did a false breakout there, broke to the downside, broke this market structure, pulled back, made a lower high here, right? And then broke market structure again. So that's showing us that the momentum in this market is currently to the downside, right? However, we do see that price has reacted off my pivot point in here, and we can see that price has pushed to the upside, which it has broken market structure on a lower time frame in here. Overall, on this market, similar to what I see on AUDUSD, I'll be looking to see something like a push up into there before price does trade back to the downside from there, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So are we looking for some sort of a pull up into that area in there, this purple area that I've got marked up, and then I'll be looking for maybe something to the downside, or price might even come a bit deeper up into this area here before we do make a decision on where we want to go next from there. Overall on EURUSD, I am bullish on it for the earlier part of this week, and then I will be looking for sells on this market as well, right? So I think that pretty much sums it up, but it's important to understand that price is on a key level right now, this level that created this new high, and it will give us some bullish momentum, but it doesn't necessarily have to break to the upside. It will give us that bullish momentum before it does turn around and continue bearish, because overall, I am anticipating price breaking below this level, perhaps making a lower low, and then pulling back from that level, maybe to go higher from that point. So that's it on there. Let me just ensure that I've covered everything. Actually, on EURUSD, my mistake, we would be looking for some sort of a pullback to the downside first, right? Because I'm looking at this 4-hour chart as well. So we should see something like price coming back to retest some of these levels in here before we see this price push back to the upside from there. My mistake, apologies for that. Looking at the daily chart as well, you can see price broke to the upside. It's either going to come back and make a higher low or come all the way back down, but I would expect it to pull back, make a higher low, and then come up into this area and then trade down. My mistake, apologies for that. Hopefully we got that. If not, just go back and double check it again. Let's move over to the synthetic indices. It's been a crazy weekend on the synthetic indices market. A lot of people went crazy about this rally that we see on volatility 75. Since we're on that chart right now, I just want to start on the monthly chart and look at something on volatility 75. So I've marked up my range on 75, and that is my range. We've broken market structure to the upside, so we are obviously in a bullish market in this instance. What I'm currently expecting, you can see I've got a yellow line up in here, so I will be expecting price to make its way up into that area. So overall, I am currently bullish on volatility 75. Looking at the daily chart, however, you can see that price is currently right now in a key level that I look at. This yellow block in here is generally where you will see reversals happening from there. So I'll be looking at, actually for this week, I'll be looking for sells on volatility 75 to take it back down, whether it's to make a higher low, since it's moving like that, whether it's to make a higher low and go higher, or whether it's to pull back, make a lower low, just do some sort of a fake breakout here and then trade up from that level in there, right? I don't necessarily have anything I'm looking at on the 4-hour chart on here, because price has just hit my key level on the daily. So I will allow it to play around in this area in here, give me some sort of a rejection, so then I have good structure to work with on the 4-hour chart, right? But overall, perhaps you might be able to get some buys and some sells, some short scalps in here, because if you look at the 30-minute chart, you can see price has broken structure in this area here, but it's actually come back and now it's just consolidating in here. So I wouldn't necessarily be interested in trading that. I will wait for some sort of clear structure on the daily and H4 chart, and then I'll be looking to get into this market. I don't necessarily, as I said, I don't necessarily trade volatility 75 as much as I used to. And the reason for that is because the market is very shitty these days. But, you know, we make what we can out of what we have. In this, let's look at volatility 100 on the weekly chart. And this is the chart that my bias is based on. I am looking for a strong bearish push on a volatility 100. It's currently in my key level on the weekly chart in here. So I will be expecting this to pull back, whether it is, like I said, on volatility 75, whether it is to make a higher low and trade back up, or whether it is to make a lower low in here and then trade back up, or whether it is to just trade back down and just break market structure. So either which way, we'll be looking for some sort of downside on there. Looking at the daily chart on here, we haven't necessarily gotten any sort of switch in momentum or anything like that. We can see that we still clearly are in a bullish market at the moment. So the highest probability would be to look for buys. But because we are so high in the range in terms of we've pushed up from here, we formed that high, we formed this higher low, I wouldn't necessarily be looking for buys in here, because as you can see, the legs are actually getting shorter, even though we've got some sort of strong momentum in this last push to the upside, it hasn't necessarily traded that much higher than this previous high. That's showing me that, hey, we've got a slowdown in momentum, right? If you count levels, that's level 1, that's level 2, and that's your third level. After your third level, you'll expect maybe a breakout, and then you'll expect it to drop to the downside. So not anything I can speak about on the 4-hour chart on here as well, because I am currently focused on catching it in this area in here and look for a switch of structure from that point. Looking at the 4-hour chart, however, you can see that we reacted very strongly off that top where we were. We've also broken market structure to the downside. So we can expect something like maybe a pop back up into around this area here, right? And then we can see this market actually crash down from that level, because if you look very clearly on here, it is showing some sort of a reversal in this instance, right? Because we've broken structure to the downside. We've then broken it again, but we reacted very strongly off the bottom. So I'll just wait for some clear structure back into even these previous highs in here. If I get a good confirmation there, then I'll be looking to take sells to the downside on volatility 100. Moving over to volatility 10, I just want to look at something on the monthly chart, right? On the monthly, or actually, let's move to the weekly, actually, right? Yeah, it's much clearer on the weekly. So on the weekly, you can see on volatility 100, I've marked this up as my range, which means this is the impulse I'm working with. It's not necessarily a strong impulse, because as you can see, it's got a lot of, pullbacks and a lot of bullish candles in between this bearish move, which means that the bullish move coming out of here is going to be much quicker than this bearish move to the downside, right? So overall, I am long-term bullish on volatility 100. You can see it's hit my pivot point, which is the yellow line on all of my charts, the horizontal line actually, and you can see it's now breaking market structure on the weekly chart to the upside. Once you see that, we do have our confirmation to say the market will come back down up into this area here, or perhaps even higher from that point, and just keep going to the upside from there, right? Let's have a look at the daily to see what we can see on here. On the daily, we can see that, hey, this market is sat down in this area for quite some time, right? So what it's actually done is it's created this low, and then once it created that low, it basically just held this range in here and just consolidated. And now this is the first breakout that we're actually seeing above a previous high. That in this instance, however, I will be looking for some sort of maybe a pullback from here. This is why I've marked this level as a pivot point as well. I'll be looking for some sort of a pullback from here back into the structure here, right? And then I'll be looking for buys to the upside. So looking at that, that would be my plan. I don't necessarily on here have any analysis on the lower time frame. And the reason for this is, you'll notice this is very common on volatility indices, is that I generally base it on the higher time frame analysis, because this market does move very quickly. So once I get my confirmations on H4 and daily, I'm simply looking maybe for a 30-minute entry or something like that to just simply ride it, right? So for now, I'm looking for price to come into this area, pull back down into around this area here, and then I'll be looking to take buys. First targets will be up in this area. Yeah, actually, first targets will be at the high that's created. If I take a buy here, my first targets will be there. And once I'm able to scale on there, I'll be looking to hold it as long as possible. So that's it from my side. I think this is actually the shortest weekly outlook that I've done so far. Hopefully we can keep with this format and keep it as short and sweet as possible. Hopefully I've given you enough information for you to go back and have a look at your charts and do your analysis as well. Remember, this is not advice to take trades, because everybody can have a losing streak. You'll never know what can happen. So always ensure that you monitor your analysis. Always ensure that you are following your rules. You're disciplined in your approach, and make sure, last but not least, make sure that you apply strong risk management, because with a good risk management, even with a bad strategy, you can still come out profitable. So that's it from my side. It has been a pleasure as always to share with you guys, and I am wishing you a blessed and a profitable trading week. Catch up with you again on the next video.